Hello and welcome to this little Spalluccipedia video. Another dive into the shadowy world of Sam Spallucci, my investigator of paranormal. And before I carry on, just give us a quick like, quick subscribe, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Now today, I'm not sat in front of a computer, which makes a lovely change. Having said that, is actually tipping it down outside, which I'm doing this little introduction inside. And I'm actually at the Grand Theatre in Lancaster. And I'm going to be chatting to Adrian Tayler a little bit about the history and all the various goings on here. So stay tuned and let's carry on. So I'm up here in the Royal Box of Lancaster's Grand Theatre, which these more studious of my readers will recognise from Sam Spallucci Ghosts of the Past, when the dark side user, as it were, Malcolm Wallace, is trying to tempt Sam over to his way of thinking. But no one quite so nefarious is with me today. This is Adrian Tayler, who is one of the official guides at the Grand, who has very, very kindly allowed me to interview him today. Hello, Adrian. Thank you very much. So let's dive straight in. Basically, the Grand is a wonderful building. I've been here many times, seen many shows, and I've always thought I had it back in my head. Just how old is the building?
Well, it was opened in 1782, so we are actually the third oldest operating theatre in the country. It was built by two guys, Austin and Whitlock, who were involved in the theatres anyway. In fact, Whitlock was the brother-in-law of Sarah Siddons, who was a very, very famous actress in those days, A-lister, equivalent of Helen Mirren or Judi Dench or whatever nowadays. So very, very well known. She specialised in tragedy, particularly Lady M in the Scottish play, which I'm not allowed to mention by name. And so it continued through various ownerships, various changes of name, as a Georgian theatre. So it would not have looked quite like this inside. Outside it did, but inside it would have had boxes all round the side walls and across the back. Two tiers of them, I think, and what would be the stalls was called the pit, basically a flat floor with benches on, and some sort of gallery upstairs for all the very, very cheap seats. And it continued as that through various changes of ownership, changes of name, until around about the 1890s. 1880s, 1890s, when it was in a fairly terrible state. The owners were trying all sorts of things to make money. They held lectures, they put a little museum in and whatever. Eventually the building became so decrepit it wasn't safe to go in. And a local publican called Henry Wilkinson, who owned the Black Cat out on St Leonard's Gate, he bought it, presumably for not very much money, did some basic renovations and adaptations so it could be run as a theatre again. And for about the next 10 or 20 years, he ran it quite successfully, to the extent that he was able to engage Frank Matcham, who is the bee's knees as regards theatre design. If you don't know Frank Matcham, if you know the Grand Theatre in Blackpool or the ballroom, the Tower Ballroom in Blackpool, that's some of his work. He did some 80 different theatres around the country. And so that was in the 1890s. And basically all the Georgian stuff went out and we got the Grand Circle and a fly tower. The fly tower is above the stage where the backdrops all get hoisted up and dropped down as when required. So it was a complete remodelling of the inside of the theatre, although the outside looks very much as it did. At that time it was then called the Athenaeum. And so it continued for only about 9 years, until one day it was panto season. They were doing Babes in the Wood, a matinee and an evening performance, and I guess the actors had all gone out to the pub between the two shows. The only living creature in the theatre was an actor's dog, which was downstairs in the dressing rooms. The place caught fire, and the roof came in. All Frank Matcham's work was ruined. It was only insured for £4,000, which meant that he couldn't get Frank Matcham back to redo it all. So they got a local bloke called Winstanley who did some theatres. He did Barrow and one other in the northwest. So not nearly so celebrated as Frank Matcham. And this is what you see today. So it's 1908, an Edwardian interior inside a Georgian shell. And again, it had its ups and downs coming into the 20th century. It was a university lecture theatre briefly. It was bought by the ABC cinema chain. And in fact, there are still the projection hut on the roof and projection windows at the back of the gallery. And it reached a point in the 1950s where the ABC cinema didn't want it anymore, and Footlights bought it. Footlights is an amateur dramatic group in Lancaster, formed in the 1920s, not the oldest. Leidos is the oldest, with a date from the 1890s rather. And we bought it for, I think, the princely sum of £7,000, which was great, except that 8-9 years later the City Council slapped a compulsory purchase order on, because they wanted to build in a relief road which was going to be parallel with the one-way system. In fact, if you look at all the car parks that sort of dotted along this side of Lancaster, this is where property has been demolished, ready for the road. But fortunately, the theatre wasn't demolished, and now the whole thing is going to be called the Canal Quarter, and some sort of development is going to happen. So that's the history of the theatre.
Oh, that's fantastic. You mentioned obviously the fire. That must have been absolutely catastrophic.
Yeah.
The idea of the whole thing just I mean, looking around here now, you can't see any evidence of it. The work, the restoration work, which obviously continues, quite outstanding. Have there been any other sorts of disasters or mishaps?
Not that I know of. And in fact, the restoration work, it was done in 7 months, which is amazing.
Wow.
And I think shortly after that, they had the doily cart come in and do Gilbert and Sullivan, Iolanthe and various others, which was very, very popular in those days.
Wonderful. So it's almost just like a little blip,
Yes,
in 7 months,
yes.
I suppose.
And I say the only casualty was the actor's dog that died downstairs.
Oh gosh. Now, talking of casualties, something which I know people who are read my books be quite interested is ghost stories.
Yes.
I know I've heard bits and bobs, people regale me with certain things. What sort of ghost stories have you heard to do with it?
Right. The most famous one is Sarah Siddons herself. I used not to believe that at all, because I thought, well, nothing bad happened to Sarah Siddons while she was here. All right, she was connected to the theatre because of her brother-in-law, and she did perform here. But she performed in lots of places. She died in London, and so I know nothing bad happened to her here. Having said that, talking to Ellie, the theatre manager, this morning, she said that some little while ago, an elderly lady came to see her who had been a cleaner back in the times when the cinema was operating here, and had bumped into, or encountered, shall we say, not physically bumped into, a lady in crinolines, and this had spooked her out, and I think she left the job after that. And Ellie brought her upstairs and showed her the picture of Sarah Siddons, and this old lady said, yes, that's her.
Wow.
Having said that's the only example of Sarah Siddons that I've heard. There are other things, both Ellie and also the lady who runs our front of house, which is the box office and bars and so on. She's been in the theatre on her own late at night, and doors have opened and closed. And on one occasion, footsteps came past, heavy footsteps on the wooden floor, except it was a carpeted room.
Yeah.
And somebody claims to have seen a ghost coming down the centre aisle of the stalls. And the curious thing there is that the feet of this apparition are actually 6 feet above the floor. You think, why should that be? Then you realise that during the time that this was a Frank Matcham theatre, the floor in the stalls was actually 6 feet higher. So on the basis that it must be somehow connected with some bad event, my only thought is this the actor coming to look for his poor little dog? But that's, and there have been people saying there were bad vibes down in the dressing rooms, which I don't think there are now. During COVID, we completely refurbished them and refitted the kitchen and all sorts of things. And I think when that sort of thing happens, ghosts tend to depart. So maybe we've discouraged the ghost downstairs in the dressing room by giving it a good refit and repaint.
I know, something to be said for a good redevelopment.
Yes.
On a similar sort of lines, I know actors are quite a superstitious bunch.
Yes.
My son is one, and there's certain things he will and won't do. And he'll say, "What are you doing that for?" I said, "Oh, no, you can't do that." Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
What sort of superstitions do they tend to have here?
Well, there's obviously the Scottish play,
Yes.
which I mentioned before.
It's the most famous.
Typically, well, a lot of them are quite practical. No whistling on stage.
Mhm.
That, I think, is basically because the technology we have here is sailing ship technology. So we have a load of bars and backcloths which are raised and lowered, and it's all by ropes and whatever, all manual. And I think the whistling was used on sailing ships as a means of communication. Now, of course, we got intercom and whatever from the stage manager, so they don't need any of that. But obviously, it would have caused some considerable confusion upstairs in the fly tower if he started hearing the cast whistling, and he start thinking, "Oh my goodness, I need to drop this or lift that or whatever." What else? Oh, you don't tell an actor good luck for some reason. You can say break a leg, but the origins of that are rather obscure. They think it's actually a mistranslation of some German Jewish phrase, which is sort of good luck and prosperity or something. But anyway, break a leg it is for actors, but not for dancers, for obvious reasons.
Yes, obvious reasons.
Dancers, it's merde, which if you know your French.
Oh, yes.
And what that is about is one of the dancers would look out of the stage door in the 19th century, and if there was a load of horse dung along the street, that meant loads of carriages had turned up, which meant the nobility were here and the show was going to be a success. So that's what dancers want. And practical reasons, have no mirrors on stage. Obviously, for the lighting, that you would end up with beams of light going into the audience. No money or jewellery, real money or real jewellery. Basically, it gets nicked.
Yes.
And that's pretty much all I can think of as regards that.
Now, as I walked in today, I noticed that we've got the great big piece of scaffolding up on the front. There's lots of renovation work. You mentioned the work downstairs during COVID, and I know that you've had the side wall out there.
Yes, that's been rendered with goodness knows what. Back in the 60s or wherever, people put stuff on walls thinking it was going to protect it. In fact, it was drawing water into the fabric of the building. So on the Lodge Street side, all that got stripped off the other year, and you can now see what the theatre looked like. The front, we are taking off layers and layers of paint, so it's going to be repainted. In doing so, we found a broken lintel. Behind the broken stone lintel was a wooden beam, and that you can put your finger through that. It's like the Forth Bridge in many ways. And also, being a listed building, we have to be working hand in hand with the council to do, agree things. They wanted to put the word Athenaeum on the top again, which it would have had back in the sort of early 1900s, but that would just cause great confusion because we're not the Athenaeum anymore. It started off as the theatre, then it was the Theatre Royal when the Duke of Gloucester turned up for one performance. Then it was the Music Hall, then it was the Athenaeum, and now it's the Lancaster Grand.
Very varied history. And moving towards the future, is the renovation which is going on, is this part of a grander plan for the Grand, as it were?
Well, the frontage is basically because it needed doing. We do have grand plans. I've had them quite a long time. In fact, you should have come to a building site this morning. I'm not talking about the front now. I'm talking about the side over there because we want to build an extension, which will give us much more room for the front of house area because it's very, very cramped. And also new cafe, bar, and a studio, theatre, rehearsal space, whatever. We got planning permission for that some years ago. The work was reliant on the council demolishing a it's a lean-to extension to what was the musicians' co-op. It's basically a toilet block, which we understood they were going to knock down some years ago, which they still haven't knocked down, unfortunately. So we can't start the work, which we were supposed to have started last month. And in fact, our planning permission ran out, so we've had to reapply for the planning permission and get new patch survey and all that sort of thing. And so basically we put everything on pause until the council sorts out that building next door.
And I imagine these sorts of things don't come cheap. I mean, how does funding work for this sort of large project?
Yeah, we would have applied for a variety of grants. We don't get any regular grant funding from the Arts Council or the City Council or the County Council. The way we run is as essentially a community theatre. So we have what we call the commercial lets. So, for example, comedian Stan Boardman was in last week, and the profits from that can go to run the theatre, which enables us to do both our own amateur productions as footlights and also to rent out at a reasonable rate to Lados and dance groups and all sorts that way. So to build the extension, we then need to apply for a load of money from various sources. In fact, we had some money, some of which I think is going to have to go back because it's time limited. We've used some of it on remedial works, but it's a bit frustrating. So we've actually put all the fundraising on hold now until we know we can actually go ahead and get building.
You mentioned footlights just before, the amateur dramatics. I presume that's one way which people can get involved with the grant?
Yes, it can be on stage, it can be backstage. I do props and scenery, mostly props. So at the pantomime I'll be lurking behind the scenery, passing things out to actors and getting them back again and hoping I've got all the same ones back again. So on, little mishaps do happen. Getting the scenery in and out is quite an interesting procedure. And of course people can be on stage, or all our ushers and so on are, and the coffee bar and so on, they are all volunteers. So we have a small paid team in the office, we have a professional technician, and the box office is paid, but everybody else is doing it because they enjoy it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Because there's real buzz when you're backstage and things are happening, particularly the pantomime, which is absolutely fragile.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What is the pantomime this year, by the way?
It is Cinderella. I'm not quite sure how we're going to get the coach on that stage, but apparently we already have it.
Okay.
So it is going to be on. Our best audiences for pantomimes are schools and brownies and cubs and so on, because they come as a group. Yep. They all know each other, have no inhibitions, they're out for a good time. The baddie comes on and hey! And then, which the baddie then can react to that because they really enjoy being the baddie. That's one of the best parts, to be honest.
Definitely. And if people want to sort of make donations to the grant or some sort of financial contribution, what would you recommend is probably the best way?
Either talk to the office, or there is, if you go to the website, there's a page about the appeal, and there is a Just Giving link there. You can put money in.
Fantastic. Well, I think that just about covers everything. Adrian, thank you very much for a very informative chat.
You're welcome.
And I highly recommend the grant. If you're ever in Lancaster, want a nice evening out and say matinee shows or whatever, come along, have a look. And you do tours as well, don't you?
We do tours every month. I also go out if people. We can do a special tour if people don't want to come on the public one. We have the Lancaster Civic Society in the other week, and I also go out and talk to WIs and probus and everybody who wants to talk.
Fantastic.
Locally.
The best way to book those would be again through the website.
Through the box office.
Through the box office.
Yeah.
I'll leave details of those in the links down below. Adrian, thank you very much.
You're welcome.